Hello again and welcome. My name is Sean Williams and I am the political science professor at Campbellsville University, lead professor and also the director of KIPP program. And thank you once again for joining us on another one of our stimulating discussions on politics and current affairs. I have with me two of our students from our political science program. From my left to my right, I have JD. And also Kalea. And if you've watched any of our previous podcasts, you're, of course, familiar with both of them so far. Thank you to both of my guests for joining me. How are y'all today?
Awesome. How are you?
Well, I'm a little bit tired. So for those of you who may be following along, the original plan was for us to be broadcasting last night at about 10:30. Today it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. That's going to be important here in a second as we have our conversation. But at about 10:15, when we were preparing for our discussion, we realized we just didn't have enough information to adequately discuss the events of the day. We pushed back our broadcast for a few hours. And so hopefully now we'll be able to have a little bit more of an informed and interesting conversation. So to get us started, and before we really get into the events of Tuesday, November 6th, I want us to backtrack a little bit and start off by talking about the polarization in America today and how and where this polarization came from. So who wants to start off with that?
Well, I kind of want to digress a little bit and get off topic. I first want to just recognize all the women that were elected, and just being raised by women, especially African American women. That was very important to not only important to me, but important to my grandmother, who called me last night, and she was kind of in tears to kind of see all those African American women, not only African American but Native American women in general, just women in general, being recognized and actually running for those type of positions and not being afraid of, the typical stereotype that a woman receives from the everyday life of a man, of being in a position like that. So I want to start off with that. But if you want to, Kalea, you can go ahead and get to the original question.
Well, let's start talking about the divide within the Republican Party. So it's obviously been divided in between the establishment and the anti-establishment, and that's created some of those things, some of the divide, the polarization,
Well, as long as JD, you're going to take us off into the topic of African American women, or women in general, but also African American women. Let's just go ahead and jump into a couple of the results. I'm going to go ahead and share on my screen, and I'm going to be using, for anybody who wants to follow along or check back with this later, I'm going to be using mostly conversation or images from Politico.com. And thank you very much, Politico.com, for the quality of your coverage last night and for helping keep us informed. But one of the hot races last night, which is technically not over yet, is the race for Georgia governor. This race featured Brian Kemp versus an African-American woman, Stacey Abrams. And this was, for me personally, a fascinating race to watch. Either one of you familiar with the Georgia race and its background, or why this race was so interesting, or why it's not yet been decided?
No, I didn't get a chance to look at that one, nor did I know that African-American women was in contention to win that election.
The last I saw from that race, she had said that she was not going to concede until the last vote was counted.
The interesting thing here was that Brian Kemp is currently serving as the Secretary of State for the state of Georgia, which means that he is the person who's ultimately responsible for running the election and certifying the election which he contested. There have been multiple allegations in Georgia of voter fraud over the last several elections, including charges against Brian Kemp that have been brought about from the Democrats that he was attempting to manipulate voter outcomes by manipulating voter polls. And so even though there's a margin of victory of about 1.6 percentage points in this race, Ms. Abrams has so far, as Kalea pointed out, has so far refused to concede defeat. She is waiting for both a full recount of the race, but also she wants to see the results of a series of lawsuits that have currently been leveled against her opponent by both internal and external forces within Georgia, to make sure that, in fact, the race was clean enough to be certified. So that's something that you don't see often in American elections, where, I mean, not so much court cases resolving the outcome of elections, but court cases that are hinging upon voter fraud by one of the candidates who has the ability to potentially change the outcome of the election versus the other. So that's fun and fascinating. So to get back to our original discussion, we're talking about this question of polarization between the political parties. And Kaleo was correctly identifying the divisions within the Republican Party. We therefore have to talk about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has already today taken the time to share with America his views on the election and his role in that election. So let's talk about Donald Trump. What is Trump's impact on American politics today? And specifically, how did Trump play a role in elections last night?
Well, I think one of his big effects on it is he kind of made like this, I guess, a social barrier and racial barrier between not only just African Americans but women as well. And so you can kind of see that with the winning of all those women, that a lot of those were kind of pushed on and provoked by the way that Donald Trump perceives women to the national eye, which kind of got those ladies and women going. Last night, all over the Twitter feed, I literally was just refreshing my page, and literally there were so many people, or women, and just young women, who were just saying they were inspired by even the women that lost, by how they were inspired by the way that they handled themselves, and the way that they carried themselves, and how educated they were, and it just inspired them. And so, but I think a lot of that came from the way Donald Trump has perceived women, and the way that he has created kind of like this social, economic, and racial barrier between everybody.
Ms. Clark, how about you? What do you feel that Donald Trump's role has been in last night's election, or in politics over the last couple of years?
Well, he has claimed that, he's responsible for holding back the blue wave. He said that multiple times in that press conference earlier today, where he was speaking. But it definitely goes into this idea of Trumpism, I think, and like what role he's personally played in like social media and the press and the news, and just the relations between them and Americans and things like that.
Do you guys feel that Donald Trump's impact has been largely limited to divisions between Republicans and Democrats? Or do you also sense that there are some rifts being built within the Republican Party, and that maybe Donald Trump might be harming Republican Party politics? What do you think?
Well, I think that he might be doing a little bit of both, creating a division between the Democrats and the Republicans, but also by some of his word choices and the things that he has, passed and improved, that he's hurting some of the Republican parties as well, which kind of has caused this, ongoing war. And a lot of Democrats, when they're winning, the first thing they're saying is, we can now defeat Trump, or we now have leverage because we've overtaken Congress to, make it harder for Republicans to get things approved, which I think, we're not going to see any progress as a nation if we kind of have this ongoing battle between Democrats and Republicans. Instead of them coming together, trying to work together, they kind of made this little tug of war thing of, now we have this control over here, so we're going to pull back this way. We don't like Trump, so we're going to try to make it hard as possible for you all now, because we have some, a little bit more authority than we have had in previous elections.
Mitch McConnell said something to the Democrats, saying about how whenever they were trying to impeach Clinton, that it only worsened their numbers, like the Republican Party's numbers, and increased support for the Democrats. So just kind of like keeping that in mind, just you know.
So are you then suggesting that the Democrats should hold off from launching any kind of direct assault against Trump, or just trying to attack Trump to the point of impeaching him and removing him from office?
I feel that Trump has more power whenever he's feeling attacked, like, and he has more momentum that way. And I feel like that would only gain support for Trump. So I'm not sure.
So let's turn to talk about a little bit more of the results from last night's election. So as we stand right now, and again, we are now 12 hours, 16 hours after the votes were being tabulated. Who's in control of the American political system? Who won last night?
Well, the Democrats, I think they took control over Congress, but the Republicans still held the majority of the seats in the Senate, if that's the question that you're asking.
But how large are we expecting the margin to get? So I'm currently showing on the screen for you guys what Politico is currently estimating to be the breakdown in the House. Of course, you need 218 votes in order to win the House of Representatives. Currently, the Democrats have clinched 223 of those seats, but we still have about 20 seats outstanding, 25 seats outstanding to be counted. And over on the Senate side, it looks like the Democrats have only guaranteed 46 seats, the Republicans 51, but there are still about 5 seats left that we're trying to sort out which way those are going to go, maybe 4 seats left. So how do you think this is all going to shake out? Where do you believe that the House of Representatives is eventually going to land? Either one of you guys. Leah, you try that one. What do you think the final margin is going to be?
I mean, I think that the Democrats are going to have the House. I don't think that what's left is going to change that one, which isn't personally too much of a surprise for me.
Do you want to make any guesses of the 25 seats that are left? About how many of those do you think the Democrats are going to end up with?
I would guess about half of them, or majority of them, if I had to guess. Would be the rest of it would be Democrats.
So that would put it somewhere around 240, 245, a net gain of about 40 seats. So now turning away from Congress, let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the statewide races. How did politics go in Kentucky last night? Were there any major winners, any major losers in the campaign here in the state of Kentucky?
Well, I think one of the most important ones, just based off, of society and us accepting the LGBT community, it was Kim Davis losing her reelection in Kentucky. I thought that was very important because she had came out earlier, and had denied rights to, gays in that area. So I thought that was a kind of an important one. Just to show how, we're kind of progressing, not only as a state, but as a nation too, of recognizing that community and people, who have different views on, a man dating a man and a woman dating a woman. We also saw that with the national election too, of governors from different states who have won the election that were openly gay or part of the LGBT community as well. So I thought that was an important one.
Ms. Clark, go ahead. I
mean, I was just going to mention that McGrath bar race in the Lexington area. It was a close race. I think it was like 51-48, I think was the margins. I don't know if those are like the official ones or not. But that was a close race. I was honestly expecting the Lexington area to go blue this one. So it was kind of a surprise for them to end up going red, and with Louisville being the only like blue area.
Yeah, and I also in that race too. I also think that what's her last name? McGraw. I think she made an important statement at the when she found out that she had lost, that she wasn't going to give up. That this wasn't the end of of her running for elected office positions. And I also think that she was a very important role model to a lot of women. Like I said, last night I got on Twitter, I was just refreshing my page literally, and so many women, they were upset. Not necessarily women, but just people in general were upset that she kind of lost. They kind of didn't want Barr in there. They kind of wanted her in there. And I think she was very, very inspirational for what she stands for, and her resume and credentials as well. Was very inspirational to a lot of people in the state of Kentucky.
I have a few friends of mine who live in the Lexington area who were McGrath supporters, and their message to Kentucky today was basically half of the Democrats in the Lexington area didn't show up to vote, and Amy McGrath lost by 10,000 votes. If 10% more had gone to the polls, then Amy McGrath would be a member of the House. But she did run a fairly positive campaign. Certainly wasn't as in the mud, as they say, as Andy Barr was, until maybe the debate she had with Andy Barr, where things got a little bit personal in the debate. But for the most part, her ads were a little bit were pretty straightforward. So last night there were a number of ballot initiatives in states around the country. We had our own ballot initiative here in Kentucky last night, amendment called Marsy's Law. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, what was or what is Marsy's Law? What impact are we expecting it to have on the Kentucky Constitution, assuming it ever actually goes into effect, which is not a guarantee. But first, what is Marsy's Law and what is it supposed to do?
Well, Marsy's Law, it gave crime victims more rights for, I believe, for voting, I believe, allowing them to be informed on their cases more, and to be and to attend all cases dealing, if they were involved in the case, to be at all hearings, regardless of what it was, to be there, just so they can know what's going on. So the next time that they go to court, they won't be hearing, terminology or words that they weren't aware of because of hearings that happen outside of the investigation. So it just gave them a lot more rights to be there, and to make them more aware of how their court cases is going, and what charges that they would be facing. So.
On balance, do you guys feel that Marsy's Law is an important and necessary contribution to the Kentucky legal system? Or do you feel that for the most part is either unnecessary or in fact might have been harmful?
Well, I think it's beneficial, just to, necessarily so you can make it fair for individuals, necessarily so they can know what's going on, if they're able to attend all hearings and be in there and hear what's going on, than to come into the next hearing and be surprised of what's going on. So I think it was important, and this would be a great initiative to be put out there.
Ms. Clark, how about you? Where do you stand on Marsy's Law?
I think it's important just for protection of rights, because it applies, because you're innocent until proven guilty, but a lot of the times, like, that's not how it works, or that's not how they're always treated, or people are taken out of consideration or things like that. So it just helps protect like individuals. So that's always important.
Continuing our discussion, did you guys happen to, of local Kentucky politics, did you guys happen to catch any of the local Kentucky races here in Campbellsville, Taylor County? Some fairly exciting and even maybe unexpected results here in the local area. Did y'all catch any of those?
Well, I looked at it a little bit. The last time I had looked it up was last night. It was around like 9 or 10, and Democrats had won majority of the election positions, but I didn't haven't looked at it again since yesterday to see any results.
So in somewhat surprising fashion, maybe not surprising, there were two very close local races. For the mayor's race, we had a two-way race between the incumbent, Tony Young, and his opponent, his former opponent from the previous two elections, whose name was Brenda Allen. After Young had won the last two races against Miss Allen was actually able to come ahead and pull off the victory in this race. And then in our county judge exec race, our four-time county judge was ousted in a very closely contested race with margins, and I think an outcome that a lot of people weren't necessarily expected. But Barry Young, the Republican candidate, or Barry Smith, excuse me, the Republican candidate, was able to take the lead and secure victory in a key local race last night, which again was fairly controversial. So other things that have happened over the last 24 hours, I suppose we would be amiss if we did not discuss that as we were sitting down and setting up to have this conversation, it appears that Jeff Sessions has been asked to resign and has submitted his resignation to Trump's chief of staff. Obviously, this is very early on. We're only now learning of this. But what do you guys think about Sessions' resignation? Were you expecting it? Do you think that this is going to change the outcome of the Mueller investigation? Ms. Clark, why don't you go first with that?
Personally, I believe that the midterm elections are the reason why this didn't happen sooner. And I feel like that they waited until afterwards to, go ahead with this just to keep any extra attention away from it, any extra attention away from like the elections and candidates and things like that. So.
That seems like a very reasonable argument to be made. Mr. Dove, how about you? What do you feel about the Sessions ouster as it's currently being reported on Politico.com? Were you expecting it? Do you think it's going to change the Mueller investigation in any way?
Well, I don't know if it'll change the investigation anyway. But, I kind of was expecting it maybe a little later or sooner than later. But I guess it was good timing, so it wouldn't necessarily take away from, elections and, the eye on the bigger prize. So, I guess it's kind of like perfect time, if you want to be honest, that it came just at the right time. Elections were over, and so now they're taking care of things that need to be taken care of. So I guess it's perfect timing.
Another topic that we should probably discuss, and we actually alluded to this a little bit earlier on with the discussion of the Georgia gubernatorial race. On both sides of the aisle have been allegations of voter manipulation and vote tampering. There have been several cases brought forward by the Republican Party suggesting voter mail fraud on the part of the Democrats, individuals who were engaging in multiple votes, where they were getting voter absentee ballots from other citizens and voting in large numbers for other individuals. On the Democratic side, there have been numerous allegations of voter roll purging designed to discriminate against Democrats. There was a city out in Kansas where apparently they moved the voting location outside of the city limits. In part, some have argued to keep the larger or growing Hispanic population from within the city from participating. Do you guys feel that any of these efforts on either side to manipulate the outcome have had any effect? Is there any reason for us to think that that might be the case? What have y'all concluded?
Well, I think that, just based off, the accusations and stuff that's been brought to the table, I definitely think there has been, some type of, voter fraud that's going on. And obviously, I'm not for sure of the lady's name that's running in Georgia, but she feels that, it's very important that she wants a recount and she wants, the results from those accusations to be brought to the table because, you want to make sure that it's fair. So, obviously there's something that's going on there that we aren't aware or have been aware of yet. But like my grandma said, what goes on in the dark comes out in the light.
Ms. Clark, do you have any concerns about the legitimacy of the outcome last night?
Not necessarily. I just feel like that there are people that take the voting fraud seriously, and that there are some that are just kind of like, oh, those are just things that distract people, from voting or things like that, just to take away legitimacy from, either candidates or the whole voting process in general.
Speaking of things that would distract voters or potential voters from the races, in the final days before the election, there were also a number of attempts at what some might consider to be voter intimidation, things that happen across the country that one could argue their timing was related to trying to decrease voter turnout among minorities, especially. Specifically, there was a shooting in a Jewish synagogue, and also an apparent attempt to enter into a black church, which instead of doing so, the Saylet in Louisville, Kentucky went to a local McDonald's, or to a local Kroger rather. Another accusation of an attempt to enter into and attack a black church up in the Northeast. Do you feel that these efforts at voter intimidation resulted in lower numbers of participation among minority groups? Is there anything in any of the data that suggests that might have happened?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily worked for voter intimidation, because the minorities have been known for probably decades to not participate in voting. And participating in voting. But I think in some states, especially states where women were elected for the first time, or, women or men or young African-American men are elected for the first time, that you kind of see that, minorities are starting to participate more in voting and starting to take it very, very serious. Because, they're not liking what's going on, the way minorities are being treated, and the only way to fix that is about voting. So, if you don't vote, you don't really get too much to say. But, if you do vote and get someone in there that understands and can relate to where you come from, or relate to what you have been going through, or kind of just understand what's going on, you have a little more, say so. And I think minorities are starting to understand that aspect of voting, how important it is to vote.
Exit poll statistics released by ABC News, I guess this afternoon, said that 28% of voters were non-white, which would be about the highest ever for a midterm, and only 1 point away from the record in any election, which was set in 2016. And it's to reflect on the how in 1990 only 9% of voters were non-white. So that would suggest that maybe there's been an increase in non-white voters, and as well as things like that happening, around campus. Here at Campbellsville, there were the flyers that were put out that said it's okay to be white, put on cars across campus, as I guess maybe intimidation things. But I personally feel like that only encourages people now to go out and vote, just things like that.
Well, it certainly sounds like, to your point, if more minorities than just about ever in history did vote, certainly the attempts to keep them home probably failed. So we're running a little bit out of time as we're hitting the 30-minute mark. One final question, I'm gonna let you guys take this in turn. Now that the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives, knowing that the Republicans have maintained control of the Senate, what do you see happening? Do you think there is any legislation that the Democrats are going to try to pursue? Do you feel like Congress has any chance of working together going forward? Look into the crystal ball. Tell me what you see.
Well, one of the first things I think Democrats, since they've taken over the House, they're going to try to reduce, tax cuts for, minority families and small businesses. I think that's one of the big things that they're going to try to, put forward and put bills out there to help not only minorities but small businesses as well. I think they're going to make it a little more hard for Trump to put legislation through that kind of creates a barrier for minorities as well. It's something that has been put forth and was in a lot of campaigns and a lot of slogans for people who were running for those positions, that they want to make sure that everyone is being treated fairly, and to focus more on things in-house than to kind of worry about things out-house, like building the walls and stuff like that, wasting tax dollars on things like that when we need to focus on things that's inside. So I mean, I see some bills remaining, but I also see a lot of things getting changed and switched over, and I also see us being a little more proactive towards things for minorities. So I think that's going to be one of the big focuses as well.
Ms. Clark, you get the final word. How do you see the next year and a half, 2 years going in Congress?
Well, Nancy Pelosi said it was a great day for America, and that was in regards to healthcare, because that was, I believe, the number one reason for voting was healthcare, even more than immigration and everything else that was going on. Like, I think it was like 42% of voters that they were concerned with healthcare. So I definitely feel like with the Democrats winning the House, that healthcare is going to be on the forefront, and that the Senate and Republicans aren't going to be able to push it down and keep wasting time on healthcare for Americans. And so but healthcare is going to have to be addressed in the next year and a half.
I'm very thankful that you took the time to listen to Nancy Pelosi's, or at least excerpts from her speech last night. I actually haven't listened to anything that she said in a few years. But to anybody who's been watching us from home, thank you very much for joining us as we're running out of time. I was, however, asked to share what a good friend of mine has identified as being his favorite tweet from the night. As we sign off today, Ann Coulter had tweeted last night, "Kansas is dead to me," alluding to Kansas deciding to replace the Republican governor with a Democrat, to which someone responded, "Did it drop another house on your sister?" Thank you very much, and God bless.